It's the Wizard of Oz Munchkinland playset. It's the mayor of the Munchkins. Pretend he tells Dorothy how to get to Kansas. You can use the tornado transporter and pretend Dorothy's back in Kansas. The Wizard of Oz Munchkinland playset with the mayor. Dorothy with Toto sold separately from Mego.
The Wizard of Oz might be the most watched film in American history. Its fame is international, its characters beloved by people from all cultures and creeds. But even though it's hard to find anyone nowadays who hasn't seen the movie at least once, surprisingly few have read the book it was based on. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. When Baum began writing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, per his mother-in-law's suggestion to novelize the bedtime stories he told his 4 sons, his goal was to write the anti-fairy tale. As fans of this podcast know, the folklore found throughout Europe is full of pain, misery, and moral lessons. One might go so far as to say it's very messed up. And similar to Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Baum thought children of his day deserved a story that was just plain fun. He believed that modern education had enough morality and that children's stories should be told for pure entertainment. I think it's fair to say that Baum accomplished his goal, but perhaps subconsciously he managed to include some lessons anyway, like that power is not always what we perceive it to be. Dorothy describes herself as small and meek, while the wizard is the great and powerful, yet it's Dorothy who slays witches, tames lions, and frees the slaves, while the wizard cowers in the corner, sending little girls on dangerous missions that he's too afraid to go on himself. The book may have been written by one man, but it took 9 men and a woman to turn that book into a script, and then 600 more men and women and 2 doggos to bring it to the big screen. For many, it was a labor of love, for some, it was a labor of money, and for a select few, it was just a contractual obligation. All those brilliant minds, but not a single one knew that this silly, nonsensical fantasy movie would one day be a cornerstone of American cinema, one of the most watched and beloved films ever made. And if you were there to witness its production, you wouldn't have thought so either. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Before I tell you that story, you've got to hear the original tale. Because while the movie was mostly loyal to the source material, they did take some creative liberties for better and worse. Mostly for the better. But honestly, I don't know if you'll be more surprised by the source material or by the multitude of insane ideas that almost made their way into the movie, but were thankfully rejected. We're covering all of that and more in this episode of Messed Up Origins, but I should tell you, this won't be our only Oz episode. This is just the start of my brand new series, Oz Explained. So make sure you sacrifice those like and subscribe buttons to the algorithm gods so you don't miss out, and... Wait, do you guys hear that? I think that's the tornado siren. I gotta go check this out. Oh, great. Of course there'd be a storm the moment I start recording. Now the audio's gonna be all messed up. Could today get any worse, Gunther? Say, that tornado's looking kinda close, isn't it? Gunther? I don't think we're in Chicago anymore, bud. Wait, seriously? They have a giant reflective bean here, too? Why do people like that thing so much? It's literally just a giant funhouse mirror covered in bird shit. And is that a Peter Francis Geraci office? Alright, well I guess Oz is a little more like home than I expected. All it's missing is a munchkin getting mugged on his way home from work. I guess we could stay here for a little while. Why don't you go play with the munchkins while I tell these nice people a story? Good boy. Off to the Lollipop Guild you go. What? I never go anywhere without my podcasting mic. Just don't ask where I was storing it. So upon reading the Wonderful Wizard of Oz book, you'll notice right away that Dorothy is only in Kansas for all of 5 minutes. Baum spends less than 1,000 words describing the dry, flat, colorless landscape. Funnily enough, Baum never lived in Kansas himself, so his description does not come from first-hand experience, but some believe he was friends with a Kansas native who gave him this impression of the state. Dorothy is described as an orphan and a well-grown child for her age, a fitting description for her movie counterpart as well. She lives with her Auntie Em and Uncle Henry, and she has a pet dog named Toto, who may have been the most perfect casting choice of all. Now, unlike the film, Uncle Henry and Auntie Em don't have any farmhands working for them, meaning that there's no Kansas equivalent to the characters we meet in Oz. That wouldn't work for the book anyway, because in this universe, Oz is a real place and not a dream like in the movie. So at this point in the book, on page 5, Uncle Henry calls out that a cyclone is approaching and for everyone to get in the cellar. But the movie added a lot of preamble, and there was almost even more. Remember me saying that the script was worked on by 10 different people? No? You skipped the intro? Come on, man, I worked hard on that. Well, the first guy, Herman Mankiewicz, tried extending the Kansas segment by adding a random interaction with a lost limousine. I learned this and the majority of the behind-the-scenes info we're covering today from the making of The Wizard of Oz, written by Algene Armitz. Her book contains everything you could want to know about how the movie was made, including all the ridiculous abandoned storylines like this one. There were 5 pages of dialogue where the pretentious woman riding in the limousine explains why her dog, Adolphus Ajax Rittenstaufen III, is too valuable to play with Toto. Then the limo drives off and the cyclone arrives. I'm just gonna chalk this non sequitur of a scene up to movies still being in their infancy stage in the 1930s. I mean, before Wizard of Oz, musicals even functioned entirely differently, where instead of songs being used to explain the narrative and move the story along like we're accustomed to nowadays, the plot revolved around the musical numbers. Basically, the first act would introduce the story in conflict, then one of the characters would say something like, "If we can raise the money, we can save the family farm. It's time to put on a show." Then the story would come to a near complete halt while the actors sang and danced for an hour straight. But anyway, this random interaction with the rich lady's dog was already cut before the third writer, Noel Langley, got his hands on the script. Langley no doubt made the most significant contributions to the story, which is why he's solely credited with the adaptation, but in some areas he contributed a little too much. I think a lot of his additions were really great, but they needed some fine-tuning. For example, he invented the subplot where Dorothy was forced to give up Toto. Only to my surprise, in his version, Auntie Em was portrayed as the villain. Miss Gulch still played a small role by informing Em that Toto had bitten another student, but Em was going to lead the charge on getting rid of him. And to top it all off, Dorothy was going to cry that Auntie Em never wanted her and that the people in the asylum were nicer to her. I have no idea what asylum she's referring to, but Dorothy being treated this terribly by her aunt would make Miss Gulch being the Wicked Witch equivalent confusing to the audience. Not to mention, the whole no place like home motif wouldn't make any sense if Dorothy was treated terribly by her family, so this bit changed as Langley updated his script. We also gotta credit Langley with inventing the 2 farmhand equivalents of the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. Funnily enough, he thought up a different, completely random backstory for the Lion, but I'll tell you more about that later. As for Professor Marvel, he was invented by the script's 6th and 7th writers, Florence Ryerson and Edgar Allan Wolfe. These two were credited for writing the screenplay in addition to Langley. Ryerson and Wolfe originally gave Professor Marvel a series of unique assistants, so he had someone to talk to before Dorothy showed up. First, it was a mute dwarf, then they changed it to his daughter, until finally settling on the horse. But let's get back to the cyclone. Dorothy misses her chance to be safe in the cellar with her aunt and uncle. In the book, it's because she's trying to fetch a terrified Toto from his hiding place under the bed. But in the movie, she was running late because she tried running away from home. In both versions, she's in the house when the cyclone picks it up and carries her away. But in the book, the house is picked up gently and she feels like she's floating on a cloud until she calmly drifts off to sleep. She isn't thrown around and knocked unconscious like in the movie. By the way, in my opinion, this is still the scariest portrayal of a tornado I've ever seen in a movie. The visuals, the sound design, the sheer terror in the characters' voices when it's approaching, it's hard to believe this monstrosity was just a 30-foot tall roll of loosely woven cotton fabric on some metal beams. I think everyone watching knows where the cyclone takes Dorothy though. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I mean... Are you kidding me?
Oh, wow, look, what's that? Presenting crispy wheats and raisins, an incredible raisin cereal. Flakes are big, crisp whole wheat.
When Dorothy regains consciousness, she learns that she's been transported to a beautiful land that completely contrasts with life in the Kansas countryside. And similar to the film, the book's illustrations transition from dullish browns to vibrant colors. Fun fact, the movie's transition from sepia-toned Kansas to colorful Oz was decided on before the very first draft of the script was even written. On the first page of Mankiewicz' first treatment, there's a note that reads, "As discussed, this part of the picture, until the door is flung open after Dorothy has arrived in the land of the Munchkins, will be shot in black and white, but every effort should be made through tinting to emphasize the gray nature of the landscape and Dorothy's daily life." So Dorothy doesn't make it far out of the house before she's approached by some very old and very short-looking creatures that welcome the most noble sorceress to the land of the Munchkins. They also humbly thank her for killing the Wicked Witch of the East, who, in both versions of the story, was crushed by Dorothy's house. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She should have taken some sidestepping lessons from Gothmog. Just like in the film, the witch's legs shrivel up and disappear, which is explained as her being so old that they quickly dried up in the sun. But there is a major cosmetic difference with this witch versus the movie's witch. The magic slippers she's wearing in the book are silver, not ruby. And if you thought that was weird, consider that in Langley's first draft of the script, he cut out the slippers entirely. And in his second draft, they were mentioned, but never actually used. It wasn't until his final script that the slippers became her tool to get home, and changed to ruby so they would stand out on camera more. Prior to this, Langley just had Oz fading out once they reached their happy ending, and cross-dissolved into Dorothy laying on the floor. Just try to imagine the Wizard of Oz without the ruby slippers. That's like Luke Skywalker without his lightsaber. Oh, that's right. Nice work, Disney. So remember how in the movie, Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, appeared in a bubble?
She wore a crown and she came down in a bubble, dog!
Right, well that doesn't happen in the book. In fact, the Good Witch is already waiting there when Dorothy leaves her house and sees Munchkinland for the first time. Also, this Good Witch is not Glinda. Now in the book, Glinda is the Good Witch of the South, and we don't meet her until much later. The book's Good Witch of the North is a little old lady, not much bigger than a munchkin. We aren't told her name, but she plays the same role as Glinda in the movie, telling Dorothy about this strange new world and directing her toward the Emerald City so the Wizard of Oz can help her go home. She also gives her a magical kiss on the forehead, granting her immunity while she's in Oz. This protective enchantment was originally going to be in the movie, but Dorothy being invulnerable to any kind of harm kinda kills the tension. So they kept the kiss, but reduced its significance. The final major difference between the book's Munchkinland and the movies is the Wicked Witch of the West. She makes a grand entrance in the movie, but we don't see her for a while in the book. And when we do, she doesn't give a shit that the East Coast Witch is dead. She just wants her silver slippers because they contain powerful magic. We'll talk more about her when we get to chapter 12. In the meantime, let's head down the yellow brick road to Oz. And while we're on the way, I can tell you about our sponsor, Squarespace. Just when it seemed like Squarespace had hit the peak of user-friendly web design, they went even further with their brand new Design Intelligence. This AI-powered feature builds on Squarespace's 20 years of experience, letting anyone from your grandma to your dog create a personalized, stunning website tailored precisely to their needs. All it takes is a few inputs. Describe your business type, pick your favorite colors, and Design Intelligence handles the rest. In moments, you'll have a complete site loaded with all the essential features you could want. And there is no shortage of features either. Whether you're selling handmade crafts, scheduling classes or appointments, showcasing your art, or streaming your original music, Squarespace has you covered. There's a reason Squarespace has been dominating the web design space for 2 decades. Just go to squarespace.com/Jon Solo or hit the link in the description to see why. And remember to use code Jon Solo to get 10% off your first purchase. So another major difference between the book and the movie is that because Book Dorothy's adventure is real and not a dream, a certain amount of preparation had to be done. She grabs herself some bread, puts on a pink bonnet, and changes into a clean blue and white gingham dress that would be a staple of the movie Dorothy's appearance. She also puts on the dead witch's silver slippers because her own shoes were dirty and old. and she figured that if the slippers still looked so new after the witch had worn them all her life, they must be pretty durable. As she makes her way along the yellow brick road, which is referred to as the Road of Yellow Brick in the book, she encounters some more Munchkins who praise her for freeing them from the witch, similar to the lineup of Munchkins she meets in the movie. And eventually, she comes across a rather large cornfield guarded by a single scarecrow. To save us some time, I'll tell y'all right now that she meets all of her traveling companions in the exact same way as the movie, with the only difference being the book's characters all have unique backstories that explain why they're missing the quality that they're missing. We learn the Scarecrow was only made yesterday, which accounts for some of his lack of brains, that the Tin Man was a victim of the Wicked Witch of the East, who bewitched his axe to chop off his limbs one at a time until he was made entirely out of tin prosthetics, explaining his lack of heart. And then there's the Lion, who is a total pussy. Cat. While bawling his eyes out and drying his tears with his tail, he says he's a coward because his roar has always been enough to scare away any threats and he's never had to back it up. His opportunity comes soon after he joins Dorothy and the gang though. As they're making their way through the dark and spooky forest, they encounter Kalidas, creatures with the bodies of bears, heads like tigers, and long claws to tear their victims to pieces. I'm guessing that these beasties were 2/3 of the inspiration for the lions, tigers, and bears song, which, by the way, was going to be a lot longer before they cut it to save time. Luckily, the group finds a makeshift log bridge to help them cross to the other side of a wide ditch with sharp rocks at the bottom. And once they make it across, Scarecrow has the brilliant idea for the Tin Woodman to chop at the tree with his axe until it falls into the ditch. The Tin Woodman does exactly as he's told, and the Kalidas are sent falling to their painful, spiky deaths. As the group draws ever closer to the Emerald City, they encounter a field of poppies, but unlike the film, they aren't a trap set by the Wicked Witch in the original story. They're just a natural feature of this part of the country, but they still pose the same threat. When our heroes try to cross it, they fall asleep. This is no doubt a reference to poppy seeds and stalks being used to make opium and heroin, which I hear will also put you to sleep. But don't worry, because simply walking through a field of poppies, even one this massive, would not have that effect. Dorothy is the first one to be sedated, then the Lion. The Scarecrow and Tin Man were fine because they aren't organic, but now they have a problem. How are they supposed to get this 500-pound lion out of the field? This problem also became a bottleneck for the movie's writers, because the solution from the book was impossible to put on film. In the book, the Tin Man witnesses a field mouse running away from a bobcat and feels bad for it, so he chops off the bobcat's head. And to pay back his kindness, the field mouse, who is actually queen of the field mice, orders her hundreds of subjects to carry the lion out of the field. If you've seen my episode on the messed up origins of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, you'll remember that a similar change had to be made for the 1971 film, because in the original story, Veruca Salt is thrown down the garbage chute by hundreds of trained squirrels, which the film's modest budget could not afford. They did manage to pull it off in Tim Burton's adaptation, but in that instance, the trained squirrels were limited to sitting on a stool, opening nuts, and throwing them down a chute. They resorted to CGI for the stunt involving Veruca. When it comes to The Wizard of Oz, the writers used a solution that L. Frank Baum himself actually invented for the stage adaptation he produced in 1902, where the Good Witch triggered a snowfall that wakes them up. Somehow. Maybe I'm an idiot, but I do not understand why snow was the solution. Does it kill the poppies? Does the sudden drop in temperature arouse Dorothy and co. out of their hazy stupors? If I only had a brain, maybe then I'd be able to figure it out. I did try Googling the answer, but any attempt to look into the snowfall just brings up countless articles and shorts where people focus on the fact that the fake snow in the movie is made of asbestos, which is toxic to humans. I'm just gonna say though, with all the other accidents that happen on set, asbestos was the least of their worries. But more on that in next week's episode. After the group fully recovers and thanks the little helpers for saving their lives, they reach the Emerald City. And when the doorman fails to scare them away by threatening them with the wizard's infinite power, he says they've passed his test and allows them inside. But first, and this is important so remember it for later, he gives them special goggles they have to wear so they aren't blinded by the city's brilliance. Then the group enters the city and after a few days meets the wizard himself. Only he's nothing like they expected, and if you've only seen the movie, you won't be expecting this either.
You don't have to be a wizard to know that the Toyota Tercel is one of the surest ways to get from one place to another with more...
The group's experience within the walls of Emerald City is pretty accurately captured by the movie. In both versions, they're treated exceedingly well and given their own rooms where they can rest and recover from their journey. And the movie pushes this a little bit further by showing them being treated to a spa day.
What day?
A spa day.
What is this word spa? I feel like you're starting to say a word and you're not finishing it. Are you trying to say spaghetti? Are you taking me for spaghetti day?
Also, literally everything in eyesight is green. The clothes, the food, even the people. To create this same look for the movie, a handful of women in MGM's costume department were tasked with dyeing hundreds of garments green over a 2-week period. The group is eventually granted an audience with the wizard, but the catch is only one of them can meet with him at a time, and he'll only accept one meeting a day. This is where things get interesting, because in the film, our heroes all meet him at once, and the wizard takes the form of a giant floating emerald head surrounded by fireballs. But in the book, he takes on a different form for each visitor. Dorothy was summoned to the throne room first, and she's amazed to see an enormous head floating over a big throne of green marble, almost exactly what we see in the film. But the next day, the Scarecrow visits the wizard, and this time he's shaped like a lady fairy, dressed in green silk gauze with green hair, a crown of green jewels, and green wings. Then there's the Tin Man. We aren't blessed with an illustration of the horrible monstrosity that he was forced to witness, but it's basically an arachnid pachyderm hybrid. Described as nearly as big as an elephant with a rhino's head, 5 eyes in its face, 5 long arms growing out of its body, 5 long slim legs, and covered in thick woolly hair. It's kinda like if Snuffy the Snuffleupagus had a baby with Shelob. It's a good thing that he didn't take this form for his meeting with the lion, or it probably would have ended like their meeting in the movie, with the lion jumping out the window. Nah, instead the wizard just decided to blow the lion's mind by personifying a ball of flames. But how did these meetings actually go? All of them were the exact same. They made the request to Oz, the great and powerful, and he told them that he would help them if they killed the Wicked Witch of the West. This was a terrifying prospect for our heroes, especially since Dorothy didn't have another house to drop on her, but they accepted the mission nonetheless and set out the following morning. The road to the witch's castle is a rough one. Or it would be if it actually existed. Apparently, there is no road to the Wicked Witches because no one ever wants to go that way. Instead, they're just told to keep west until they see her big yellow castle. Now, up to this point, I've been following the same path as our heroes, but going forward, I think I'm just gonna chill here in Emerald City. It's clean, it's comfortable, and if I'm being totally honest, commissioning these painted backgrounds wasn't cheap, and I've maxed out the budget for this episode. What just happened? Pay no attention to the man in front of the green screen.
Find relief from the morning pain and stiffness that are often early signs of arthritis. Go off to see your doctor today and get a kick out of getting up in the morning. Pfizer, wake up to good mornings.
It's at this point in the story that the Wicked Witch finally appears, but she isn't around for long. And the same can actually be said in the movie. Granted, the movie's West Side Witch plays a bigger role in that story and directly intervenes on Dorothy's journey multiple times, but in total, she's only on screen for 12 minutes. 12 minutes is all it took for Margaret Hamilton to become the quintessential witch in the minds of millions. And a seriously strange coincidence is that the Wicked Witch's entire story arc is confined to chapter 12. Huh? 12 and 12. Freaky stuff.
He said, they're sort of interested in you for a part in The Wizard of Oz. And I said, oh, gosh, think of that. I said, I loved that story from the time I was 4 years old. What is it? And he said, well, the witch. And I said, the witch? And then he said the final thing. He said, yes, what else?
I think another reason that the Wicked Witch's presence feels so much bigger in the movie is that there are multiple shots of her hiding in the trees and watching the heroes through her crystal ball. So to the viewer, it feels like she's always there, lurking just beyond our periphery, and she could strike at any moment. The Book's Witch has her own way of watching over the heroes, but it's not a crystal ball. Instead, she has one eye as powerful as a telescope. The other is covered with an eye patch. If you're listening to this on any podcast platform other than Spotify, I highly recommend you Google the illustrations for the book's Wicked Witch, because I guarantee she is not what you're imagining. Unless you're imagining a short, ugly old woman with pigtails, a frilly pea coat, a long skirt, and umbrella, then you're right on the money. I think the filmmakers knew that audiences wouldn't find this look very intimidating, so they went with a darker color palette, gave her a cape, a broom, and made her skin green to show off their fancy new Technicolor cameras. That's right, in the original book, her skin was not green. Now in the movie, Dorothy and friends enter the Wicked Witch's territory fully kitted out with a giant butterfly net, a mallet, a wrench, and a gun. Yeah, I don't know where the Scarecrow got a gun, but he doesn't even use it on the flying monkeys when the witch sends them to kick all their asses and bring her Dorothy. Something similar to this happens in the book, and I think you're really gonna like this part, because now we're dipping our toes into the lore of Oz. The witch uses a silver whistle to summon several waves of animals to kill our heroes while they rest. First, she sent a pack of 40 wolves to their campsite, but the Tin Man used his trusty axe to slaughter all of them. And he did it so efficiently that Dorothy slept through the entire ordeal. Next, they were ambushed by a murder of crows, and while you would think that a scarecrow would scare them off, he instead resorted to snatching them out of the air and snapping their necks one by one. Third was a swarm of bees, and they all died when they tried to sting the Tin Man. He was the only one they could find because Dorothy and the lion tore apart the scarecrow and used his straw as cover. It was his idea, don't worry. I think, although I'm not positive, that the movie's infamous abandoned jitterbug sequence was their creative twist on the bees. For those who don't know, the jitterbug song was the only major song that was completely deleted from the movie. This scene would have entailed Dorothy and friends being stung by jitterbugs, triggering a magic spell that would take control of their bodies and make them sing and dance forever. Pretty terrifying when you think about it. The scene was filmed over 5 weeks and cost the studio $80,000, about $1.8 million adjusting for inflation. But it was cut after the very first preview because the movie had a bloated runtime, and out of all the musical numbers, it was the most disconnected from the plot. Although you can still hear the witch tell her flying monkeys that she sent a little insect up ahead to take the fight out of them before sending the monkeys to catch Dorothy. The book's fourth, but not yet final group of attackers are the Winkies, the witch's armed guards. They're also called Winkies in the movie, but they were portrayed as green-skinned King's Guards, whereas the book's Winkies are fancy-looking gentlemen wearing yellow. Regardless, the lion easily scares them away with one of his trademark loud roars, and the Wicked Witch punishes her soldiers by beating them with a strap. At this point, the witch is fuming, but she has one last ace up her sleeve: the flying monkeys. Unlike the film, where the leader of the flying monkeys is shown hanging out with the witch throughout, in the book she has to summon them using an enchanted golden cap, which she can only use 3 times. The first time, she ordered them to take over the west side of Oz and enslave the Winkies. The second time, she used them to defeat the wizard and force him out of the west. And now, she wanted to destroy these invaders. Well, all of them except for the lion, whom she was hoping to strap to a saddle and ride around like a horse. Just like the movie, the monkeys do as they're told, tearing the scarecrow to pieces and dropping the Tin Man on jagged rocks. But they can't actually hurt Dorothy thanks to the good witch's protection spell. So instead, they take her back to the Wicked Witch, throw the lion in a cage, and tell the witch it was nice working for her, but they gotta go. The witch goes on to demand Dorothy hand over her magic slippers and holds her prisoner in both versions. But her captivity lasts a bit longer in the book, and she's forced to do chores for the witch, kinda like Cinderella. During this time, Dorothy learns the witch is a bit of a coward, like she's afraid of the dark, which is why she won't just go into Dorothy's bedroom at night and take her slippers while she's sleeping. She also won't steal them when Dorothy's in the bath, because she's terrified of going near water. and you're gonna learn why soon enough. I'm assuming you've already seen what happens in the movie, but the book explains why it does what it does. It also gives a new reason for her needing these silver slippers. See, before she had the flying monkeys to help her get what she wanted, but now that they're gone, she needs a new source of power, and those slippers would be perfect. Unfortunately for the witch, Dorothy has no interest in taking these slippers off. So, she concocts a truly evil plan where she trips Dorothy, knocking her to the ground and causing one of the slippers to slip off. With an evil laugh and a glint in her eye, the Wicked Witch triumphantly held the slipper up and declared that it won't be long before she gets the other one. To which Dorothy responded, "Alright, bet." Then she picked up a bucket of water and dumped it on the witch. Now in the film, Dorothy's killing of the witch is a complete accident. When the witch lights the scarecrow on fire, Dorothy splashes him with water to put him out. But the witch was also in the splash zone, and within moments, she melted into a puddle. In other words, she became the splash zone. In the book, Dorothy's just pissed about the theft of her personal property, which is ironic considering she technically stole the witch's property in the movie. But we learn that this witch is so evil, her blood dried out years before, and her body couldn't take on any moisture without melting away like brown sugar. Then, in both the book and the movie, Dorothy is immediately praised by the Winky guards who never wanted to work for the witch in the first place. Then they rescue and repair all of her friends, unlike the movie where her friends rescue her. The movie's final battle with the witch was almost very different though, and there was more than one version of it, because in Noah Langley's first batch of scripts, he invented a completely different backstory for the Cowardly Lion that was a blend of Beauty and the Beast and Sleeping Beauty, two movies that surprisingly wouldn't be made for several decades. In an early draft, the lion was a Winky prince named Kenelm whom the Wicked Witch turned into a lion. And during the final battle, he would slay a dragon to prove his courage. Then, in his next draft, Kenelm's wedding party was interrupted by the witch, similar to how Maleficent interrupted the celebration for Aurora, and she transformed the prince into a lion so his would-be wife could marry her son, Bulbo. After this, her goal would have been to conquer Emerald City so that her son could be its king. But the arrival of Dorothy would spark a revolution that culminated into an epic battle where the witch unleashed her army of 10,000 men, 4,000 wolves, and 200 winged monkeys. In the end, good would conquer evil. Dorothy would kill the witch with water after the witch hit Toto with her broom. Fair enough, and all her companions would gain the qualities they were missing through the adventure instead of learning they had them the entire time. Now, as ridiculous as the story sounds, I think it's kind of unfair to just assume it would have been terrible, because when you put some of the ideas that did make it into the movie on paper, those sound pretty ridiculous too. That being said, I think it's just stupid how Noah Langley straight up abandoned the story that L. Frank Baum wrote. And even if his bizarre reimagining of the Battle of Five Armies did play out well on screen, there's no denying that this would have been a worse Wizard of Oz movie. Thankfully, when Langley turned in his final script with the words, "Do not make changes" written on the front, the studio used their better judgment and made all the changes. Now, before the group returns to Oz, Dorothy takes the witch's most powerful tool. But it's not her broom like in the movie. Hell, in this version, she doesn't even have a broom. She just carries around an umbrella. Nah, Dorothy grabs the golden cap that summons the monkeys. Not because it summons the monkeys, she doesn't even realize it does that, she just thinks it's pretty and fits her perfectly. It's on their journey back to the Emerald City that they run into the Queen of Field Mice again, and she suggests they use the golden cap to summon the flying monkeys and hitch a ride. So, Dorothy does, and here we learn about the monkeys' backstory. It turns out they can be very kind when they want to be, but their playfulness and sense of humor got them into trouble. Sometime before this, when the current Flying Monkey King's grandfather was in charge, they made the mistake of dropping a prince into a river, ruining his pink and purple velvet outfit. The prince got over this incident pretty quickly, but his wife, the princess, did not. At first, she ordered for the monkeys to have their wings tied together and be thrown in the river, just like her husband. But when he pointed out this would probably kill them, she settled on cursing them to grant 3 wishes for whoever owned the golden cap. So when their new master, Dorothy, wished for a ride to Emerald City, the monkeys obliged. And while it was pretty uncomfortable for her friends to ride with the monkeys, considering they got their asses kicked the last time they saw them, it was a smooth and efficient ride that Delta Airlines still hopes to achieve someday.
Your road to stardom starts on Delta.
The last time Dorothy flew, she was in a house.
Let Delta and Disney make your fantasy come true.
Once our heroes return to Oz, the different storylines between the book and movie converge into one. Temporarily. In both versions, the group meets with the wizard, tells him they completed their quest and killed the witch, and to their frustration, he completely blows them off, which in turn leads to him being exposed. In the movie, Toto simply jumps out of Dorothy's arms and pulls the curtain back to reveal the feeble wizard in his mere mortal form. But in the book, the lion angrily roars at the wizard, causing Toto to run away in fear and accidentally crash into the screen the wizard was hiding behind, knocking it down. After the wizard's true form is revealed to be that of a decrepit old man, he reveals he's nothing more than a humbug. He tells them he was blown to Oz on a hot air balloon and that the residents of the country mistook him for a wizard. Not unlike what happened to Dorothy when the Munchkins thought she was a sorceress. But unlike Dorothy, the wizard picked up and ran with this new title, ordering the Winkies to build him a city of emerald. We also learn that he's from Omaha, Nebraska, and not a fellow Kansan like in the movie, and that instead of using a microphone to amplify his voice, he learned how to throw his voice from a decades-long career as a ventriloquist. One of my favorite details he reveals that would have been impossible to achieve in the movie is that Emerald City isn't really emerald on the inside.
Oh man. Oh God. Oh man.
Remember those protective spectacles the gatekeeper gave the group before they entered? Yeah, those just had tinted lenses that made everything look green. It's too bad they couldn't have done something like that to the camera lens for the movie. It would have saved the costume department a ton of time. Apparently, this wasn't the first time that L. Frank Baum used this idea in one of his stories either. 10 years prior, he wrote a short story for a newspaper in South Dakota about a farmer who gave green goggles to his horses so he could feed them wood chips and they would think it was grass. So when it comes to the lessons that the Wizard of Oz teaches us, I think there are two major takeaways. One is that power is not always what we perceive it to be. While the wizard is described as all-powerful throughout the book, Dorothy is described as small and meek. In reality, though, these descriptions are backwards, for it was Dorothy who defeated the witches and freed the oppressed people, while the mighty wizard was literally cowering in a corner. That isn't to say that Dorothy wasn't afraid of the witches. She absolutely was. Or she would have been if she didn't smush the first one with her house. But the experience that she gained on her way to the Emerald City, and the support of her friends, gave her the confidence to confront and ultimately defeat her enemy. As for the wizard, the moment he was exposed, he crumbled. And as you're about to see, he would rather run away than face the consequences of his actions. Reminds me of some YouTubers I used to follow. The other lesson is that the Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow all had what they needed the entire time. They just didn't believe it yet. But I think the book does a way better job of conveying this than the movie, because throughout the book we see each character exemplify the traits they supposedly lack. The Scarecrow thinks up multiple ideas for how to get around the obstacles in their path. The Tin Man accidentally steps on a beetle, and when he sees it's dead, he cries so much that his jaw rusts shut. And the Lion bravely jumped a gap over sharp rocks with each of his friends on his back, even though he specifically stated he was terrified of falling. We see this in the movie a little bit, but it's not as obvious. Instead, the wizard turns their supposed missing quality into a symbol that he then gives them. A diploma for brains, a heart clock for a heart, and a medal for bravery. While as clear-cut as the book makes its lesson, the trio still wants their individual rewards, so the wizard thinks of a clever workaround that's only a deviation away from the movie. He fills the Scarecrow's head with straw and bran for his brand new brains, and needles to prove he's sharp. The wizard then cuts a square hole in the Tin Man's chest and places a beautiful heart made entirely of silk and stuffed with sawdust inside. Lastly is the Lion, whom he gives a bottle of green drink and made him drink it, because courage is always inside one. In reality, that drink was probably as useless as AG1. Then the wizard turns to Dorothy, and again, like the movie, he offers to take her home in his hot air balloon since he can't continue living among his citizens once they find out he's a fraud. Only when the day comes for them to leave, Toto jumps out of the basket at the last minute in both versions, forcing Dorothy to chase after him. And by the time she's successful, she can no longer reach the balloon's basket. Ryerson and Wolf wrote an alternate version of this scene where Dorothy, the wizard, and all of her friends get in the hot air balloon to escape an angry mob of Emerald City citizens who found out the wizard's secret. only for the balloon to be popped by a woodpecker. Then they would plummet to the earth only to be caught in a giant net by the Munchkin Fire Department. Thankfully, this was cut because it sounds like hot garbage. Now, after Dorothy misses the balloon, Scarecrow has the bright idea to have the flying monkeys bring her to Kansas, and Dorothy tries this, but the monkey leader tells her they aren't able to leave Oz. Also, this counts as one of her 3 wishes. At this point, Dorothy has lost all hope. The wizard was already fading out of sight, and there was no one left in Oz who could help her. Or so she thought. While Dorothy is bawling her eyes out, one of the Emerald City guards pipes up and suggests Dorothy visit Glinda, the Good Witch of the South, and the most powerful of all witches. And since she was left with no other options, Dorothy wiped her tears, shrugged her shoulders, and started walking south, with her now fulfilled friends trailing behind her, ready to help her the same way she helped them.
Curad comic strips. Ouchless bandages with pictures on them of you and me.
And so the next leg of their journey begins, the portion that was almost completely left out of the movie. I understand why though. Technically, the Wicked Witch dies only 62% of the way through the book, whereas in the movie she dies 86% of the way through. 62% of the movie only gets you to their arrival in Emerald City, not even to their first meeting with Oz. Some parts just had to be trimmed out, and honestly, I think that having almost half the story remaining after the big baddie dies would have been terrible pacing. So what did the heroes encounter on this leg of their journey? Let's run through it real quick. First, there's the fighting trees, one of the only bits from this section that made it to the movie. Only in that version they're attacked way earlier when it's still just Dorothy and the Scarecrow on their way to Emerald City. In the book, they managed to escape thanks to the Tin Man using his trusty axe to chop off the tree's branches. After that, they cross over the Great Wall of China and enter the country of China, but not the one that we know of. This entire country is made of delicate, fine china, like fancy dinnerware. This strange land made it into Langley's first script, but had to be cut due to the difficulty of portraying it on film. Not to mention, nothing of significance happens here. They don't even crack a dish. Finally, they enter another forested area where they run into a bunch of stressed out animals. There's elephants, wolves, foxes, tigers, bears, but no lions, which seems to be the problem. Apparently, the forest had been terrorized by a giant spider that devoured all the other lions. They need a brave new king to kill the spider and take his rightful place on the throne. If this had happened at the start of the story, you could be sure that the Cowardly Lion would not have volunteered. But now, things are different. He tracked down the spider sleeping in its nest and ripped off its head. Then he told the other animals he'd come back to rule after Dorothy goes home. The spider wasn't the last of the dangers they would face on their journey, though. That would be the hammerheads, little people with no arms and flat heads that extend out like an accordion to bludgeon their victims to death. But in the midst of watching her greatest friends get beat up by these freaks, Dorothy, who still has the kiss of protection on her forehead, has a genius idea. She uses her cap to summon the monkeys and requests they take them to Glinda's castle, something she probably should have done before they left Emerald City for the second time. The residents of Quadling Country, known as Quadlings, are similar to Munchkins and Winkies in that they're a shorter, chubbier people. The biggest difference is their country is themed red, whereas the Winkies preferred yellow and the Munchkins liked blue. When the group arrives at Glinda's castle, they're granted an audience with the Good Witch, whose beauty almost compares to the actress who played her, Billie Burke. She has silky red hair, a dress of pure white, eyes as blue as the sky, and a throne covered in rubies. She tells Dorothy that she can indeed send her home, but she requires payment in the form of the golden cap. Dorothy happily obliges, and Glinda uses the cap to send each of her companions to their respective homes. The lion will be brought to the forest, the Tin Man back to the west to rule over the Winkies, and the Scarecrow to Emerald City to be their new and unusual leader. Then she pulls an Aladdin and gives the Flying Monkey King the golden cap, freeing them from servitude forever. After that's settled, she turns her attention to Dorothy and reveals that she can use her silver slippers to get anywhere in the world in 3 steps, which is pretty similar to the Monkey King's cloud hopping shoes when you think about it. Hell, the whole story bears a loose resemblance. Both of them feature protagonists on their journey to the west while they're accompanied by some disgraced companions. Now, the way this all goes down in the movie is Glinda appears in Emerald City, informs Dorothy that her ruby red slippers can take her to Kansas, then instructs her to click her heels 3 times while saying, "There's no place like home." Out of all the iconic lines in The Wizard of Oz, I think this ranks number 1. And we have the writers, Ryerson and Wolfe, to credit for it. Granted, Dorothy does say this line in the book too, but it happens way earlier, just like the encounter with the trees, when she first meets the Scarecrow, and she explains to him that she needs the wizard's help to go home because there's no place like home. But when Dorothy clicks her heels in the movie, she doesn't so much arrive in Kansas as she does wake up there. It turns out her entire Oz adventure was a dream, and her companions were all the farmhands. But in the book, she clicks her heels, says, "Take me home to Aunt Em," and is picked up by a whirlwind of air. For a moment, the poor, scared girl can't even see what's going on around her. She's in the void, so to speak. But soon after, she's plopped down onto a grassy knoll right in front of Uncle Henry's new farmhouse. He had to build a new one because the cyclone took the last one to Oz, and Dorothy didn't bother to bring it home. When Dorothy looked down at her feet, she was somewhat disappointed to see the slippers had fallen off. They were probably somewhere in the expansive desert that surrounded Oz. Her disappointment was short-lived though, because she heard the sweet sound of Aunt Em's voice calling out her name. With both of their eyes flooding with tears, Dorothy and Aunt Em embrace. They are overjoyed to see each other. Then Aunt Em asks Dorothy where she's been all this time. That's when Dorothy replies that she's been in Oz, and while she enjoyed the strange, beautiful land, she was glad to be in Kansas again. Because truly, there is no place like home. Hey, has anyone seen Gunther? Did I seriously leave him back in Munchkinland? Oh, there you are. Thank gods. What's that? You joined the Lollipop Guild. You're the president of the Lollipop Guild? How'd you manage that? Gunther, election fraud is not okay, buddy. Alright guys, I've got to go straighten this out with the guild, but we've got a lot of Oz left to explore. So if you want to learn more about the multiple near-fatal accidents that happen on set, or the insane sequels that L. Frank Baum wrote, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn notifications on for your subscription. Otherwise, you might miss part 2, which is dropping next week. I know, I did not plan on making a 2-parter, let alone an entire Oz Explained series. But neither did L. Frank Baum. So if there's enough demand, I'm happy to oblige. Let me know if you want to see more in a comment down below. I would also love if you commented your thoughts on the Wizard of Oz story, both the book and movie, and any personal anecdotes or experiences you'd like to share. Until next week, my name is Jon Solo, and remember, there's no place like home. Also, John shot first.